know. But, Terrence, is it necessarily the case that firms' quantities will be too low under differentiated products national prices?
I don't think so, because they can change the quantities to match what the demand is.
Well, how does it relate to our analysis of externalities, right? We know that they bring an externality that's equal to the markup to the consumers. And under Cournot, they don't bring any real externalities to the other firms, so there's nothing to offset that. But how about under differentiated products national prices? Well, so they earn a negative. They create a negative externality on other firms when they lower their price, right? They create a positive externality for consumers, but they create a negative externality for other firms, right? And when they create a negative externality for firms, that may offset or more than offset the positive externality they bring to consumers. And so under differentiated products national prices, they may actually produce too much, at least in principle, if the other firms have large markups relative to their markup, and they take a lot of business away from them by lowering their prices, that may cause more harm to the other firms than it causes to consumers. So a simple example of that is, imagine that there's a firm, it's earning giant monopoly profits on some product, and then someone comes in, offers a really crappy product at a really low price. Everyone would be sort of better off if everyone was buying the good product, even though they were paying a high price for it. But now this other firm comes in and undercuts it. Everyone switches to buying the crappy product. The other firm loses its profits, and this firm gains. But clearly everyone overall is worse off, right? The other firm loses more profits than the consumers gain. Yeah, but
is it a good example of that? Maybe like the fast food industry, because it's better for everyone not to eat McDonald's and pay for McDonald's, but then because of McDonald's is so cheap, everyone goes to McDonald's.
Well, you'd have to think who was the monopolist that they came in to compete with. Because this effect only occurred. Your reasoning is a little bit more paternalistic. It's like consumers aren't acting in their best interest. But I think a better example would be like rip-off versions of various things like the iPod or whatever, right? If they're totally crappy, you create a rip-off version. Maybe everyone starts buying the rip-off version, but that takes away lots of profits from Apple, but it doesn't really do any benefit, to society overall.
But
right?
does it? I don't see how that's taking away from society at all.
Yeah.
Because people are valuing the zoo.
Yep.
But the restaurant at the price they're paying for, right?
Well,
so are you saying they don't know the price?
No, imagine that everyone was going to buy either an iPod or this crappy knockoff, regardless, right? In that case, and imagine the crappy knockoff, everyone values less than they value the iPod, right? And imagine that Apple can't lower its price to compete with the new guy who comes in for some reason. Then what's going to happen is that everyone's going to move from buying the good product to buying the crappy product.
Why would they move necessarily?
Because the price is lower.
But they're not. But if they value the iPod higher, then they're going to.
Well, but not if the price of this is lower. The point is they're not fully capturing. If the price.
You have to do a utility. You have to see the utility function.
Well, imagine that everyone values the iPod at $400, but it's priced at $500.
Oh.
And they value the other one at $350, but it's priced at $350.
Okay.
Right? Sorry, it's priced at you sort of see what I mean.
Yeah.
You can get because they're not internalizing the profits that are brought to the firm. You see what I mean? They're not. Everyone values the iPod at $2,000, right? And it's priced at $500. And they value the other thing at $1,900, but it's priced at $100, right? And then everyone's going to switch to the crappy one, even though the total amount of value to society is greater if they all buy the iPod, right? Because they don't internalize the profits that are being made by Apple. And that can only happen in something like national prices competition. Yeah.
So basically, like, if there's two products and neither one gives the consumers any surplus, but Apple is making profits, but the other guy's not, society as a whole is actually better off if Apple makes it.
Exactly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
With DNPI, does that mean that they can have the same price? Like what happens when they have the same price?
Sure, they can have the same price.
Like soda, for instance, like all soda have the same cost, but it's like by two different companies.
Yeah, and then it's just some people buy one, some people buy the other. And if any firm lowered its price, it would get a few more consumers, but it wouldn't get a ton more. Yeah.
Okay.
That's just called symmetric differentiation. So when I talk about symmetric differentiated Nash prices equilibrium, that is exactly what you just described. It's like there's a bunch of different stuff, people view it differently, but they all end up charging the same price because it's sort of different, but sort of all different in the same way. You know what I mean? So that's exactly what symmetrically differentiated Nash prices equilibrium is.
Can you possibly,
Yeah.
I'm still confused, but can you possibly draw the two research surpluses? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure.
Like what you're describing with the iPod versus the other?
Yeah. So
Because I just don't,
yeah. So imagine that people value the iPod at $2,000, and they value the other thing at $1,900, right? But the price for the iPod is $500, and this other guy comes in and offers this thing for $100. Now clearly everyone's going to buy this, right? Because they get $1,800 of surplus by buying that. They're not going to buy the iPod, but they only get $1,500 of surplus by buying that. And imagine the cost of producing both of these things is zero, right? Then clearly it would be better if everyone bought the iPod than everyone buying this, because the total amount of value is higher here, right? So by coming in and offering the product for a lower price, if Apple can't lower its price, the total value to society is reduced. That would never happen with Cornell because the quantity of iPods sold would stay fixed. Okay. Okay, so in fact, I want to define the term competing or competition to just mean that two firms' products are substitutes for one another. So all that it means that I compete with you is that if I lower my price, that leads to less demand for you. So if firms act to internalize the externalities, pecuniary or otherwise, that they cause to each other, what do we say that the firms are doing, Alex? Don't look at the slide.
I'm sorry. If they act to internalize the externality.
So if I increase my quantity or reduce my price, I hurt you. What do you say that firms do if they act in such a way as to avoid hurting each other in that way?
Well, what did you call it? I don't want to say like a cartel.
Yeah, it's collusion. Yeah, collusion or a cartel. That's exactly right. So this is my favorite phrase for it is actually a combination in the restraint of trade. This is what U.S. law refers to it as. So the Sherman Antitrust Act outlaws combinations in the restraint of trade. So this has been denounced ever since Adam Smith and is illegal under the Sherman Antitrust Act. And here is a very famous cartoon that helped stimulate that act. So there were these groups of cartels sort of taking over. They had a lot of political power, as you will explore in your next problem set. They also had a lot of economic power, and so they were portrayed as this giant octopus. And this was an example of a progressive cartoon that helped stimulate the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act in the late 19th century. So once upon a time, before the Sherman Antitrust Act, it was legal to form a cartel. And in fact, you could even enforce an agreement made among the parties that they wouldn't lower their prices. And in fact, this was true in continental Europe up until the 80s when the Maastricht reforms were put into place. And effectively, it's still legal in many countries. So for example, in Peru, there's essentially no effective restraints against forming a cartel. And Britain actually was the first country to make cartels illegal back in the 18th century. But nowadays, the U.S. is now probably the world leader in enforcement against cartels. Something like 1,000 businesses have people get fined or have people that go to jail every year for collusive activities. So things that are illegal include explicit agreements about the prices that firms will charge or the services that they will offer. So Adam Smith has a famous quote that anytime you see members of the same profession getting together to talk about anything socially, it's almost always an indicator that they're engaging in a conspiracy against the public interest. So this makes meetings and communication like this illegal. This is only true if firms are competitors. We'll see in the lecture after Thanksgiving that if the firm's products are complementary with one another, a situation that we'll call collaboration, these things are often permitted. Even without explicit communication, you can even go to jail for tacitly agreeing with other firms to collude. And your problem set will ask you to exploit that in the context of auctions. This is prosecuted much less often because it's harder to prove. But if you do get caught for either of these things, you can go to jail, and people have for many years, and you can get large civil penalties. In particular, you can actually be forced to pay 3 times the harm that was caused by your activity, because the idea is that there's only about a 1/3 chance you get caught, and so they want to multiply it up so that the expected penalty you face is equal to the harms created. So there's many practical challenges today in running a cartel, and this makes collusion difficult and only possible in some very limited settings. Okay, so the basic problem is that the basic problem that people face in trying to form and maintain a cartel is that a cartel is going to benefit all of the members of the cartel, but each firm is going to have an incentive individually to betray the cartel. And Anthony, why do firms have an incentive to betray the cartel?
Because it's not natural for any firm, like by lowering the price of anything, can get not the whole market, it's
Yeah.
significant profit.
Yeah. The whole idea is that the firm is internalizing an externality. And what it means something's an externality is that it's not in your interest to look out for it, right? So anything that internalizes an externality, unless it has some way to force you to do that, is not going to be very effective, right? And so by reducing the price or increasing the quantity, each firm can individually benefit by stealing business from other firms, right? And so the more ambitious a cartel is, the less stable it's going to be. That is, the higher prices it tries to sustain, the more incentive there's going to be to defect. And Luke, why is that the case?
Sorry, could you repeat it?
So the higher prices, the lower quantities, the closer to monopoly a cartel tries to get, the more incentives it's going to give its members to defect or to cheat on the cartel. Why is that?
It's because like with game theory, you have to be concerned with like what your opponents are doing.
Yeah.
So then, if one firm is showing that they're going to defect, then all other firms want to like beat them to the process so that they can capture the market share before that one firm that is defecting is going to capture like a larger share.
Not sure, but do you want to elaborate? Yeah.
For like more ambitious cartel, like the price is often more expensive. And
Yeah.
then, like for example, like if I'm in a cartel like selling cans of Coke, then selling one more can of Coke by cheating the cartel would not bring that much benefit. But then if I'm like a oil seller, selling one more gallon of oil would bring super benefit to me. So there's more incentive to cheat. So
Yeah, exactly. So if the prices are high, then by undercutting by a little bit, I get a lot more benefit than if the prices are low, right? And so there's going to be more incentive to try to steal sales the higher prices are.